Imagine the roar of the crowd in 1932. The crack of the bat, the smell of hot pretzels, chili dogs, and roasted peanuts filling the summer air. But behind the action on the field, something else was happening. Something we've almost forgotten. Concession stands weren't just feeding fans. They were shaping American food history, one wax-wrapped treat at a time. Before nachos and plastic cheese, before $12 soda cups and corporate branding, there was a time when game day food was handmade, hearty, and personal. These weren't gourmet meals, but they weren't junk either. They were the soul of mid-class America, packed into paper cones and tin cups, and sold for nickels at the ballpark. So today, we're stepping back into that golden summer of 1932 to uncover 15 forgotten recipes that once defined baseball games, not just as a sport, but as a taste of the times. Stay with us till the end, because the last one? It's a flavor no modern stadium dares to serve. They didn't call it the snack of the century for nothing. In 1932, tucked into every corner of the stadium, beneath wooden bleachers and beside clanging cash registers, was the unmistakable rustle of Cracker Jack bags. Not flashy, not loud, just a simple brown sack, warm from the sun, filled with golden clusters of caramel-coated popcorn and roasted peanuts. But this wasn't just any treat. Cracker Jack was a symbol. A dime store delight born in the late 1800s, it rose to fame hand-in-hand with America's favorite pastime, baseball. By the time the Great Depression hit, Cracker Jack had become a quiet comfort, a taste of familiarity when much of life felt uncertain. The caramel? Made with real molasses and a touch of butter, slow-cooked until it shimmered like amber. The peanuts? Salted, roasted, and lovingly stirred in, giving each handful a perfect balance of sweet and savory. And tucked somewhere inside, a tiny toy or paper trinket. For children who couldn't afford much else, it wasn't just a surprise. It was magic. Families would share a single bag from the concession stand, each child diving in with sticky fingers, hoping to be the one to find the prize. And in that moment, under the buzz of the stadium lights, with the scent of fresh-cut grass and roasted peanuts in the air, Cracker Jack tasted like hope. It wasn't just popcorn. It was a tradition, a memory, a piece of America wrapped in waxed paper. Long before ballpark hot dogs were sold in plastic sleeves and slathered in pumpable cheese, there was something beautifully simple sizzling on the grill in 1932, the old-fashioned hot dog, crowned with nothing more than celery salt and homemade pickle relish. This wasn't fast food. It was a working man's treat, a Depression-era favorite that combined economy with flavor. Sold for just a nickel at ball games and street corners, these hot dogs were served in warm, steamed buns pulled from cloth-lined drawers to keep them soft. The Frankfurters? Boiled or grilled till they snapped with every bite. But what made it unforgettable was the topping. Not ketchup, not mayo, just a spoonful of sweet and sour pickle relish, made from finely chopped cucumbers, onions, and green peppers, brined in vinegar and a touch of sugar, often prepared by mothers at home and sold to neighborhood vendors. And then came the final touch, a whisper of celery salt. Not overpowering, just enough to bring out the flavor of the meat and add that unmistakable Chicago-style lift. In the stands, children clutched these dogs like treasures, the buns barely holding together under the weight of relish and joy. Fathers shared bites with their kids, laughing between innings, mustard on their fingers, worries left at the gate. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't have to be. It was tradition in a bun, a taste of simpler times. A reminder that even in the heart of the Great Depression, Americans still found small ways to celebrate, together, one bite at a time. It was crisp, it was sweet, and it was loud. Peanut brittle, wrapped in wax paper and passed from hand to hand at the ballpark in 1932, was more than just a candy, it was a sound, a memory, a moment. You'd hear it first. That sharp crack as a boy broke off a corner. The crunch that followed, echoing between innings. It wasn't soft, like modern candy bars. This was old school, hard, golden, and unapologetically bold. Made with just sugar, corn syrup, baking soda, and roasted peanuts, peanut brittle was a Depression-era staple. It didn't spoil. It didn't cost much. And it stretched, perfect for vendors trying to make a little go a long way. Mothers made it at home in battered pans, poured it hot onto greased trays, and snapped it into jagged pieces once it cooled. Every edge rough, every bite uneven. But that was the beauty of it. At the ballgame, they came bundled in wax paper twists, stacked in small wooden crates behind the counter. No logos. No plastic. Just honest sweetness, ready to be shared. For many kids, it was the closest thing to a luxury they'd get all week. A few bites of golden sugar that stuck to your teeth and filled your pockets with crumbs. But oh, how it tasted, like freedom, summer, and a moment away from worry. Fathers would slip a piece into their child's hand during a slow inning. A silent gesture that said, "I love you," when words didn't always come easy. Peanut brittle didn't ask for attention. But for those who remember, it never quite left. Just a shard of candy, wrapped in wax paper, wrapped in memory. In 1932, long before pretzels came frozen and microwaved in plastic wrap, Ballpark pretzels were made by hand, twisted by bakers, sold warm from wooden carts, and smothered with bold yellow mustard that tingled the nose. These weren't snacks. They were rituals. You'd find them steaming under linen towels, stacked like golden knots inside tin-lined carts near the edge of the bleachers. The moment someone lifted the lid, the scent of fresh yeast, coarse salt, and warm dough would drift into the crowd like an invisible invitation. The pretzel dough itself was simple, just flour, water, yeast, and a pinch of salt, but the magic was in the boiling. Each pretzel was dipped in a lye solution or baking soda bath before baking, giving it that glossy, deep brown crust and chewy texture that modern pretzels have long forgotten. And then came the topping, mustard. Not the sweet kind. Not honeyed. Just sharp, tangy, stone-ground yellow mustard, often homemade, sometimes spicy, always applied with a heavy hand by vendors who knew how to please a crowd. Kids would hold them with two hands, biting off the ends first, licking the mustard from their lips. Fathers would tear pieces to share with their little ones between innings. And for just a few cents, you didn't just get a snack, you got warmth, comfort, and a taste that lingered long after the ninth inning. It was bread with purpose, salt with soul, mustard with memory, and in those soft pretzels, folded like arms across a chest, there was a quiet message. Even when times were tough, there would still be something warm to hold on to. Hidden beneath the bleachers in 1932, while the stadium echoed with cheers and cracking bats, a bold, smoky scent curled through the summer air. It came from an unassuming cart. No signs. No shouting. Just steam and tamales, soft, spiced, and rolled by hand. These weren't the Mexican tamales we know today, but an American working-class twist, chili cheese tamale rollitos, a recipe born from cultural blend, necessity, and flavor. They started with a humble cornmeal dough, spread thin and filled with slow-cooked chili, made from scraps of beef, stewed beans, chili powder, and garlic. To that, shredded cheddar or American cheese was added, not for richness, but for stretch. Then the mixture was rolled tight and wrapped in parchment or wax paper, not corn husks, to keep it concession stand friendly. Vendors would keep them warm in metal steam chests, stacked like cigars, their paper sleeves damp and fragrant. For just a few cents, you could peel one open and taste heat, salt, smoke, and comfort all in a single bite. These tamale roll-ups became a secret favorite among working-class families, especially those who couldn't afford sandwiches or meat pies. They were portable, filling, and always piping hot. Children loved unwrapping them like gifts. Fathers ate them in 2 bites, nodding between innings. And for immigrant families watching from the stands, they tasted like a bridge between heritage and homegrown tradition. They weren't flashy. They weren't fancy. But they were honest. And they were good. And in every chili-laced bite, there was a message. You don't need wealth to eat well, just a little spice, a little cheese, and a lot of heart. Before soda fountains buzzed with sugary syrups and vending machines blinked under fluorescent lights, there was birch beer. In 1932, at dusty ballparks across America, there was no sound more refreshing than the clink of a glass bottle and the hiss of a cap being popped off by hand. Birch beer wasn't just a drink, it was an experience. Brewed from the sap or bark of the black birch tree, It carried a deep, earthy flavor, like wintergreen with a whisper of smoke. Less sweet than cola, more bite than root beer, and colder than anything you could imagine on a hot summer day. Vendors pulled them from wooden crates packed with blocks of cracked ice, the bottles dripping wet, the labels peeling slightly from the chill. Kids pressed the glass against their cheeks before the first sip. Men wiped their hands on their trousers and passed them down the row. It was natural, sharp, and made in small-town bottling plants, often flavored with real birch oil and sweetened with cane sugar. No preservatives. No carbonation overload. Just a slow fizz and a bold flavor that lingered long after the bottle ran dry. For many, birch beer was a taste of memory. A flavor tied to dusty outfields, radio static, and sunburnt shoulders in the stands. And for those who couldn't afford peanuts or hot dogs, a single bottle was enough to feel like they belonged. You didn't drink birch beer just to quench your thirst. You drank it to feel alive. Cold, crisp, honest, and bottled in glass, like all good things used to be. They weren't sold under bright lights or flashy signs. No branding, no slogans. Just a knowing nod from a vendor, and the smell of buttery pastry and seasoned beef told you everything you needed to know. They were called dugout pockets. Not because of a marketing plan, but because they fit right in your coat pocket during a long inning, warm and waiting. These savory meat hand pies were a Depression-era answer to the modern meal. No forks, no plates. Just a golden crust, crimped around a hearty filling of ground beef, onion, potato, and black pepper, maybe a few peas or carrots if the cook had extra that week. They were baked in small-town kitchens, often by mothers or grandmothers who sold them to vendors for a few cents each. Wrapped in parchment and slipped into baskets, they were kept warm beside small coal burners or inside lined coolers packed with hot bricks. Fans would unwrap them like treasure, steam rising into the summer air. One bite in and you'd get that comforting mix of flaky crust and rich, peppered meat, still warm enough to chase away the wind from a late afternoon game. And in a time when families were struggling to keep food on the table, these pies were more than convenient. They were hope you could hold in your hand. They fed the body, but more than that, they fed the spirit. No waste, no fuss. Just flavor, warmth, and care tucked inside every crust. They weren't famous. They weren't fancy. But to the people in the stands, they were unforgettable. The kind of food that filled more than just your stomach. It filled your soul. In the heart of the 1932 summer season, when the game was tight and the crowd restless, nothing turned heads faster than the scent of spiced meat and mustard wafting through the stands. It was the unmistakable smell of a Coney Island chili dog, hot, messy, and unforgettable. Despite the name, these hot dogs weren't always from New York. The style had spread like wildfire through the Midwest by the 1930s, especially in cities hit hard by the Great Depression. They were cheap, hearty, and packed with flavor, a working-class man's feast in a bun. Vendors rolled in carts stocked with hot water baths for franks and small tin pots bubbling with homemade chili, no beans, just finely ground beef, onions, garlic, tomato paste, and a secret blend of spices. The dogs were nestled into pillowy white buns, then drowned in that rich, savory chili. And then came the finish, chopped onions, yellow mustard, and nothing more. No ketchup, no cheese. Just bold simplicity. Fans would line up between innings, clutching a nickel in one hand and a napkin in the other. Kids juggled soda bottles and steaming dogs, racing back to their seats before the crack of the bat. It wasn't clean. It wasn't refined. But it was real. In every bite, you tasted something more than just food. You tasted resilience. A recipe built by immigrants, embraced by families, and served to the sound of cheers and radio static. It dripped. It stained your fingers. And yet, no one ever complained. Because for just a few cents, you weren't just full. You felt like a king.
It was the kind of snack you didn't expect to find at a ball game in 1932. But once you tasted it, you never forgot. Steamed buns with pork and pickle slaw, a quiet, flavorful rebellion against the ordinary. Soft, pillowy, and warm to the touch, these buns weren't grilled or fried. They were steamed in tin trays, stacked inside wooden boxes over hot water, and pulled out just moments before serving. At their heart was slow-roasted pork shoulder, shredded and seasoned with a simple blend of black pepper, salt, and apple cider vinegar. No sauces drowning the flavor, just tender meat that melted with every bite. But the soul of the dish was the pickle slaw. A mix of shredded cabbage, carrots, onions, and chopped homemade pickles, all tossed in a sharp, vinegary brine. Cold, crunchy, zesty. It cut through the richness of the pork and gave the bun a brightness that no mustard or ketchup could match. Some say this dish was brought in by Eastern European or Asian immigrant vendors, blending street food with Depression-era ingredients. Others believe it was simply a clever housewife's invention, an affordable way to stretch leftover roast into something special. Whatever the origin, at the ballpark, it stood out. No loud shouting from vendors. No flashy signs. Just a nod, and a hot, fluffy bun filled with history passed to you in wax paper. For families chasing flavor on a budget, it was a bite of something different. Something bold. Something that whispered, "There's more to American food than you think." And in every soft bite of pork and vinegar crunch, you weren't just fed. You were surprised. And satisfied. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pretend to be. But in the hands of a skilled vendor or a resourceful mother, bologna became a masterpiece. Cornmeal-crusted fried bologna sandwiches were a Depression-era marvel, born out of thrift, but bursting with flavor. By 1932, they had become a quiet favorite at local ball games, served hot, crispy, and oozing with character. Start with a thick slice of bologna, not the paper-thin deli kind, but the kind you had to slice yourself from a heavy, wax-wrapped log. Dip it in seasoned cornmeal, sometimes with a touch of paprika or black pepper, and pan-fry it until the edges curled like a little hat, crackling golden and crisp. Then came the bread, 2 slices of soft white sandwich loaf, lightly toasted or warmed on the skillet. Vendors would slap a hot slice of that sizzling bologna between the bread, sometimes adding a smear of mustard, a leaf of iceberg lettuce, or a thin ring of onion if they had it. The result? Crispy, salty, smoky, and deeply satisfying. For families watching from the bleachers, this sandwich wasn't just a meal, it was a memory in motion. Kids would bite into it and feel the crunch of the cornmeal, the sizzle of the fries still clinging to the meat. Fathers would split theirs in half, saving a piece for a hungry child who couldn't wait until the 7th inning stretch. It was food that respected its ingredients, no matter how humble. And long after the crowd went home, long after the cheers faded from the field, that little sandwich stuck with you. Not just on your hands, but in your heart. It didn't need to be hot. It didn't need to be fancy. It just had to fill you up and stay with you. In the ballparks of 1932, long before nachos and combo meals, one of the most humble and strangely beloved snacks came wrapped in brown paper or tucked into a tin lunchbox. A pickled egg and cracker snack pack. Simple, portable, affordable. For just a few cents, you'd get a hard-boiled egg, brined in beet vinegar or spice cider, its white shell stained pink or golden from days spent soaking in a glass jar behind the vendor's cart. The flavor? Sharp, tangy, and unforgettable. Beside it, a neat stack of saltine crackers or buttery soda crackers, often wrapped in wax paper and paired with a pat of mustard or a pinch of black pepper in a twist of parchment. No plate. No cutlery. Just honest food for hardworking hands. This was Depression-era practicality at its best. No refrigeration needed. No fuss. And yet there was comfort in its simplicity. Fans would crack the egg open on their knee, peel it between pitches, and set it on a cracker like a tiny open-faced sandwich. Fathers passed it down to sons with a quiet nod. Mothers packed it in wax paper, hoping it'd hold a kid over till dinner. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about efficiency and tradition. Because in a time when everything was rationed, when every bite had to count, this little combo delivered. A snack of vinegar, crunch, and quiet satisfaction. Not flashy. Not loud. But, like the best things in life, it got the job done. Before candy came in foil wrappers and neon colors, there was a sweetness born from elbow grease and patience. Molasses taffy pulls. In 1932, this wasn't just candy, it was an event. A tradition that spilled out from church basements, neighborhood porches, And yes, even the back corners of baseball concession stands, where homemade batches of molasses taffy were wrapped in wax paper and sold by the piece. The ingredients were simple: dark molasses, sugar, vinegar, butter, and a pinch of salt. Boiled until bubbling hot, then poured onto buttered marble or tin. And the magic? It didn't come from a machine. It came from hands. Vendors, or often their families, would pull the taffy by hand, stretching and folding it again and again until the dark brown gloss turned a soft, golden sheen. Each pull added air, lightness, and that old-fashioned chew modern candies just can't replicate. Sometimes sold in twisted ropes, sometimes broken into chunks, it was sticky, sweet, smoky, with a hint of bitterness from the molasses that made every bite more interesting than the last. Children loved it. Adults respected it. Because behind that humble piece of taffy was labor, history, and care. At the ballpark, you'd unwrap a wax paper twist and stretch the candy like you were part of the pull yourself, letting it soften in your mouth while cheers echoed from the infield. No dyes. No labels. Just flavor from a forgotten America. And in every stretch and snap of that old molasses ribbon, there was a message. Even in the hardest of times, joy could still be handmade. In 1932, before paninis or deli stacks filled with artisan meats, there was a different kind of sandwich, flat, simple, and unforgettable. They called them pressed ham sandwiches, not because they were fancy, but because they were practical. And at Depression-era ballparks, they were one of the most dependable, affordable, and deeply satisfying bites you could buy. The bread was plain, white sandwich loaf or rye, sliced thin and buttered on the outside. The ham? Not carved from a honey-glazed roast, but from a pressed loaf, a mixture of pork shoulder and trim meats, ground, cured, and molded into dense blocks that could be sliced paper-thin or thick, depending on what you could afford. Each sandwich was slathered with spicy brown mustard, sometimes mixed with a splash of vinegar or horseradish for extra bite. The flavors were sharp, smoky, and bold, cutting through the saltiness of the ham with just the right kick. And then came the press. Vendors used cast-iron sandwich irons or hot bricks wrapped in foil, flattening the sandwiches until they were golden and crisp on the outside, hot, melty, and sealed like a memory. Served in wax paper, these sandwiches were passed hand to hand across crowded bleachers. Fathers tucked them into coat pockets. Kids devoured them between innings, mustard on their chins, bread flaking under the sun. They weren't about indulgence. They were about substance. About making the most of what little you had, and still taking pride in flavor, texture, and care. Because even in the hardest of times, a warm sandwich could remind you that you were cared for, and that something pressed, something humble, could still leave an unforgettable impression. It sounds too simple to remember. Just crackers, butter, and jam. But in the ballparks of 1932, that humble trio held the power to silence hunger and spark comfort. Sold from hand baskets and tin lunch tins, buttered saltine crackers with tomato jam were a Depression-era treat born from scarcity, creativity, and care. The crackers were basic, saltines, crisp and dry, bought in bulk and stored in wax-lined tins to protect them from heat. Each one spread generously with softened butter, the kind that had sat out just long enough to melt into every crevice. But what made them shine was the jam. Not a sugary fruit preserve, but homemade tomato jam, slow-cooked with peeled tomatoes, sugar, clove, and a touch of cinnamon. Sweet, tangy, and slightly spiced, it was the poor man's marmalade, a way to use up summer's garden bounty long after the season had passed. Mothers would spoon it into jars and wrap it in cloth, vendors would swipe it across crackers by the dozen. Packed in paper pouches, handed to hungry kids in the stands, it became a quiet favorite. Less flashy than peanuts or popcorn, but far more personal. Each bite brought layers. The crunch of the cracker, the richness of the butter, and the bright, surprising sweetness of tomato jam. In the crowd, children held them like gold coins. Fathers ate them slowly, letting the jam stretch a little further with each bite. It wasn't candy. It wasn't a meal. But it was something warm, something sweet, something that said, "You matter." And in the middle of the Great Depression, sometimes that was the best flavor of all. As the sun dipped behind the grandstand in 1932, and the final cheers echoed across the field. Vendors lit their last burners, and from a small, dented tin drum came the smell that meant it was time to head home. Roasted chestnuts, still warm, crackling in their skins. They were served in rolled paper cones, often made from old newspaper sheets or torn pages from seed catalogs. A dozen or so chestnuts, blistered and sweet, passed from calloused hands to eager palms. The outer shell flaked off with a twist. Inside, a golden, smoky, tender bite of comfort. For many families, this was the quiet moment after the game. A final treat shared on the walk back home. Children tucked the empty cones into their coat pockets. Fathers saved the last chestnut for the smallest one. And today, nearly a century later, these forgotten flavors still speak. They tell us about a time when food was humble, but made with love. When the smallest bites carried the greatest meaning. And when community was built not on cost, but on care. Fallenly to you, yes, you watching this now. Thank you for walking through this memory with me. For honoring the recipe's time almost erased. For valuing the warmth of a buttered cracker, the spice of old mustard, and the sweet smoke of roasted chestnuts on a cool summer evening. This channel exists because you care about the stories behind the food. And if you'd like to keep this table set for more, subscribe, join the family, and let's keep cooking history one bite at a time.